You know, if we're honest with ourselves, America's greatness was never measured by the size of our economy, the reach of our military, or the volume of our consumption. It was measured by something quieter, something harder to quantify: purpose, a belief that power, when it's real, is meant to serve something larger than itself. And that belief is being tested right now, not by a foreign enemy or a single crisis, but by the slow, relentless pressure of a planet responding to everything we've done to it. We live in an age where humanity has acquired extraordinary power, the power to reshape landscapes, to fuel entire civilizations, to alter the very chemistry of the atmosphere. And yet the question that confronts us is painfully simple and deeply moral. Now that we know what our actions are doing, who are we willing to be? If you trace this story back far enough, it doesn't begin with smokestacks or spreadsheets. It begins with a promise. The promise of progress that took root during the Industrial Revolution, when ingenuity and ambition lifted millions out of poverty and rewrote what was possible for ordinary people. That progress brought light to homes, mobility to workers, and opportunity to nations that had known only scarcity. But embedded in that promise was a bargain we didn't fully understand at the time. We took energy from the ground, burned it to build our dreams, and sent the byproducts into the sky, assuming the atmosphere was too vast to notice. For decades, it seemed like we were right. The benefits were immediate, the costs were invisible, and so we kept going. By the late 1900s, the warnings grew harder to ignore. Scientists began to speak not in abstractions, but in patterns: rising temperatures, shifting seasons, storms that carried more water and more fury than history could easily explain. In 1988, those warnings reached the global stage, and for the first time, the world was asked to confront an uncomfortable truth. The same engine that powered our prosperity was destabilizing the systems that made life possible. That was the moment that demanded moral courage. Not just technical fixes or clever rhetoric, but the willingness to tell our people that the future would require change. And that's where the hesitation set in. Because change, real change, asks something of us. It asks leaders to risk popularity. It asks citizens to look beyond the next election, the next quarter, the next convenience. What followed was a long season of delay, rationalization, and division. In some places, climate science became just another front in our cultural battles, stripped of its human stakes and reduced to talking points. Meanwhile, the impacts kept coming. Floods that swallowed neighborhoods, droughts that hollowed out farmlands, rising seas that turned ancestral homes into memories. And it was never evenly distributed. Those who contributed least often suffered first, and worse, small island nations watching the water creep higher, communities already struggling pushed into migration and instability. That imbalance revealed something deeper than an environmental failure. It exposed a moral one. Because when the powerful postpone action to protect short-term profit, the bill doesn't disappear. It's simply handed to the vulnerable. Still, there were moments that reminded us who we could be. In 2015, nearly 200 nations came together in Paris, not because they suddenly agreed on everything, but because they recognized a shared vulnerability. The agreement wasn't perfect, it was fragile by design. But it represented something rare in modern politics: an acknowledgement that some problems are bigger than borders, bigger than ideology, bigger than any one country's sense of exceptionalism. It was a statement that purpose could still guide power if we chose it. I've seen how hard those choices are. I've watched leaders weigh the immediate fears of economic disruption against risks that feel distant until they're not. I've seen how polarization can turn even the clearest evidence into a battlefield, how distrust corrodes our ability to act together. But I've also seen what happens when innovation meets moral urgency. The quiet revolution of renewable energy, costs falling faster than anyone predicted, communities proving that growth doesn't have to mean destruction. I've seen indigenous knowledge dismissed for generations offer wisdom about balance and stewardship that modern systems are only now rediscovering. These aren't abstract victories. They're reminders that progress, while slow, is still possible when we align our tools with our values. The truth is, climate action isn't just about parts per million or degrees Celsius. It's about the kind of society we're trying to build, whether democracy can still function when sacrifice is required, whether we believe that justice includes those who will never vote, never donate, never sit at the table, children not yet born, communities far from centers of power. It asks whether hope is something we talk about or something we practice, even when the work is hard and the rewards aren't immediate. And that brings us back to purpose. Because power without purpose burns hot and fast, consuming everything in its path. Purpose gives power direction. It tells us that leadership isn't about denying the fire, but having the resolve to put it out before it consumes us all. It tells us that planting trees in a burning forest isn't naive, it's an act of faith grounded in responsibility. So the question isn't whether we have the capacity to act. We do. The question is whether we have the will to choose stewardship over expediency, unity over division, and a future worth inheriting over the comfort of delay. If this reflection resonates with you, take a moment to share where you're watching from in the comments. Let me know how these choices look from your community, your country, your corner of the world. And if you want to keep engaging in these quieter, deeper conversations about purpose, responsibility, and the work of progress, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because in the end, this story isn't about policy alone. It's about who we decide to be when the moment asks more of us than we plan to give, and whether we're willing to answer that call.